bill that caps rent increases in Washington state at 10% per year was signed into law. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting update to a story that I was covering before about a rent cap that is going in place in Washington state. So this rent cap signed into law. It is going to be the law of the land, and there's nothing that you can do to escape it. So it is what it is. But what I will say is that it's a warning sign for other states out there, okay? For other places where they think this sort of law is a good idea. So they believe that, hey, you know what? The way that we can make sure that rents remain low for tenants is by putting rent control into place, because that's what a rent cap is. Rent cap is just a different terminology for rent control. They control how much a landlord can increase their rents. They don't look at the individual financials of each landlord, because that would take too long. That would be logical. So what you have in some cases is you have a landlord who has kept their rents ultra low for a very long period of time. So there are places in Washington state, for example, where you could probably still rent an apartment for like $500 a month because the landlord, for some reason, maybe they were an older landlord or maybe they were just trying to reward a good tenant, decided to keep the rents at $500 a month. Now, with this rent cap in place, the most they'll be able to raise their rent is up to $550. It'll be $550 a month, so $50 a month. That's it, okay? Even if every other apartment around it is renting for $2,000 a month and the landlord only wanted to raise the rent up to $1,000, that landlord can't do it, even though the rent would still be substantially below the market rate. But you know what? That's why I say you have to look at every individual landlord's finances, their individual scenario, and the only way you can really do that is by allowing the landlord to set the rents themselves. The government can't determine how much you should be charging for rent. They can't. Okay? You think some bureaucrat in some office somewhere knows how much rent should be charged? They have no clue. They have no clue. They have no clue of your expenses. They have no clue of the income of your tenant. They have no clue of what the market is charging. The only thing they know is this little number that they created off of the top of their heads. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So do you believe a bureaucrat knows how much you should be allowed to raise your rent? Do you think that they have any clue? Okay, I can tell you right now, I faced higher insurance costs than another landlord that I know, okay? I faced higher increases in insurance costs this year than another landlord who operates in the same city here in Omaha, okay? So the difference being that I have a different insurance company than him. It's that simple, okay? But, that doesn't mean that I should only be allowed to increase my rents over here to X while he's able to increase to the same amount. No, we have different finances. And this applies in Washington state as well. This applies to landlords throughout the entire country. This is why I say, do not ever think that, if they put a rent cap into place, one, that it'll ever be removed, and two, that it will ever be able to cover all of your expenses. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to get into this article, tell you what's going on up in Washington. This article is coming from the WashingtonStateStandard.com, and it says, cap on rent increases across Washington is signed into law. Governor Bob Ferguson signed the bill on Wednesday. It takes effect immediately and will not allow for hikes of more than 10% in a year. Yeah, so I guess there isn't even a delay period. It's going to take effect immediately. So let's get into the article and see what it says. Washington landlords can no longer raise rents by more than 10% per year under landmark legislation Governor Bob Ferguson signed into law Wednesday. Effective immediately, Housing Bill 1217 caps residential rent hikes during a 12-month period at 7% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is lower. The limit will last 15 years. The bill also restricts manufactured home rent increases to 5% with no expiration date. Rent increases are also prohibited for the first year of a tenancy under the new law. But when a renter moves in, landlords can set the initial rate however they please. So what this will do is encourage landlords to evict tenants and have no mercy. Absolutely no mercy, no working with the tenant whatsoever. So let's say you have a tenant who you're only able to increase their rent by, the 10%. And, the tenant is a day late. And you're like, hey, I need to bring these rents up to market rate. You're going to go through the eviction. You're not going to accept any more rent payments from that tenant. You're going to get them up out of there as quickly as possible because you need to be able to raise the rents in that unit. So this could actually encourage more evictions to happen. And also, I don't see anything in here about exceptions for small mom and pop landlords. Usually they throw in something, oh, we want to help the small mom and pops. Not this time. You notice that? Okay, maybe I'm wrong. If you're from Washington State and you know a little bit more about this law, go ahead and put a comment down below and let us know. But at least from the article, it doesn't look like there's any exceptions for people who own just one rental or two or three or four. There's no exception for somebody who's just renting out a bedroom in their house. It looks like everybody in the state who is a landlord has to comply with this law. Rent hike notices are now required 90 days before they go into effect, up from 60 days under the previous law. If a landlord raises rent above the cap without an exemption, the renter must give the landlord a chance to fix the error or can terminate their lease with 20 days notice. A tenant or the state attorney general can bring litigation to enforce compliance with the new law. The attorney general can recover up to $7,500 per violation. Yeah, now just imagine, you're a small mom and pop landlord, and there are a lot of small landlords, ones that don't pay attention to the new laws being passed or any of that nonsense, right? And I can just imagine something like this happening because I've read articles and seen similar things happen in places like New York, okay, where the landlord increases the rent over the supposed cap amount, right? And the tenant doesn't even realize it, just goes ahead and pays it, but then one day realizes they can get a payout and sues the landlord. And guess what? The landlord now has to pay, and you're talking about a small mom and pop, not a giant mega corporation. So guess what that does to the small mom and pop? It bankrupts them. Okay? It destroys their finances. All because the tenant, who was easily able to pay the higher amount of rent, was greedy. And this is how they attack landlords. This is part of the reason I say be very, very careful the places where you invest, okay? Make sure that they are landlord-friendly places where they treat you like, hey, they actually want you to be there providing rental housing for somebody. You can easily get caught up in this sort of trap, especially the small mom and pops. I'm a small mom and pop landlord. I own 5 houses, okay, right now. I just have 5 houses, and I would hate to get caught up in this mess. If you give me a sudden fine of $7,500, man, that would really hurt me. It wouldn't kill me, but it would really hurt, okay? So I understand there's landlords smaller than me out there who've been doing this for even less time, and I just would hate to see you suffer because of it. And you know what? A lot of small mom and pops are going to be like, hey, we don't want to deal with this. We do not want to deal with it, so we're just getting out of the business. If we are unable to make money off of our properties, we're just not going to rent them out. We're going to sell them to owner occupants, and that's it. Or just get out of the business, sell them to the mega corporations, and the mega corporations are going to be much, much more interested, like I said before, on making sure that if you are even one day late, they're going to evict you, okay? New construction is not subject to the cap for its first 12 years. Public housing authorities, low-income developments, and duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in which the owner lives in one of the units are also exempt. Okay, so I guess, when I said before that the small properties, there's no exception for it, I guess I was wrong. I just didn't read far enough into the article. But it looks like you have to live in one of the units if it is a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. So yeah, if let's say you just own a fourplex, but you don't live in one of the units, yeah, you're still stuck under this stupid law. And I always hate it when we're going to create an exemption for new construction. That's their way of supposedly helping make sure that development just doesn't die, because developers will leave. with this sort of law in place. The problem is that it punishes all those people who have dedicated years of investing inside your state. It punishes them. It says, well, screw you, you can't raise your rents. But this developer over here with their huge mega project, yeah, they can do whatever they want. So, what is the end result of all this? We've seen it before, okay? We've seen it before. The end result is we see properties falling into disrepair because the landlords can't afford the repairs because they can't raise the rents high enough. We also see that the market for these rent-controlled properties, right? It's very tight. There's more applicants for these rent-controlled properties than there are units. And that means a lot of people are going to be forced off into the unregulated market, those newer properties, the units that aren't under rent control, and those rents are going to be sky high. What do you think? Go ahead and put a comment in the comment section down below.